They dressed her in diamonds, yet stripped her of dignity. In a ballroom blazing with chandeliers, Zuri smiled for cameras, while whispers cut deeper than knives. Charity case project nobody. But a secret slept beneath her calm. The pen everyone craved would only move if her heart said yes. Tonight, as a $950M deal circles like vultures over a crumbling legacy, one choice will decide whose name stands and whose empire turns to dust. Because love without respect is just a costume, and Zuri is done playing someone else's part. When the music drops and the room holds its breath, she'll decide who she is, the girl they mocked, or the woman who writes the ending. Before we begin, drop a quick hello in the comments with your city and local time. I love seeing our community across the world. And if powerful moral dramas are your thing, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, but for Zuri Adeyemi, every sparkle felt like a spotlight burning against her skin. The Mwangi family's ancestral hotel in Nairobi stood at its most magnificent that night, polished marble floors, towering chandeliers and tables, dressed in ivory linen, with crystal glasses that reflected the glow of 100 candles. To the guests, it was the picture of prestige. To Zuri, it was a stage where her heart would be tested. Miriam Mwangi, the matriarch, sat at the head of the table like a queen whose word could wound more than any blade. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at Zuri, and her voice carried across the hall for all to hear. A girl like you should be grateful. You're fortunate Cato even considered you. Do not mistake tolerance for acceptance. The words stung. They struck Zuri not because they were true, they weren't, but because they were spoken so carelessly, as though her entire worth could be summed up in a cruel sentence. Around her, polite laughter rippled from guests eager to side with power. Talia, Cato's younger sister, tilted her glass of champagne and smirked. It's a Cinderella story, isn't it? Poor girl meets billionaire. Too bad fairy tales don't last. Zuri forced her lips into a faint smile, though her chest tightened. She had rehearsed for this moment, how to hide the pain, how to shield her dignity behind silence. For years she had lived with a secret heavier than diamonds. She wasn't just Zuri, the ordinary woman the tabloids painted her to be. She was Zuri Adeyemi, sole heiress to Adeyemi Holdings, a conglomerate whose reach stretched across Africa's trade, shipping, and real estate. Her family's wealth dwarfed that of the Mwangi group, but she had never sought to flaunt it. She wanted love, not leverage, respect, not reverence. That was why she had hidden her identity. Cato Mwangi, her fiancé, rose to speak, his smile dazzling under the spotlight. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced tonight, we celebrate love, proof that it conquers status, class, and wealth. Zuri came from humble beginnings, yet here she stands beside me. Isn't love extraordinary? The room erupted in applause and guests dabbed their eyes as if witnessing a miracle. To the press, it was perfect. A modern love story of a billionaire heir lifting a poor girl into the heavens. But Zuri's heart clenched. His words were daggers dressed as poetry. She turned to him, searching for the man who once held her hand beneath the stars, who once whispered that she was all he ever needed. Instead, Cato leaned toward her, his smile frozen for the cameras, while his voice dropped low enough for only her to hear. Keep smiling, he muttered. Don't embarrass me tonight. Her chest ached. Was this truly the man she loved? Or just an illusion she had clung to out of stubborn hope? Dinner resumed, but every bite tasted bitter. Between the clinking of glasses and the hushed symphony, Talia's voice sliced through again. So Zuri, she said with feigned innocence, what was it like growing up with nothing? Must be overwhelming to sit among us now. Miriam chuckled into her wine, her eyes glinting. Yes, we are all curious. How does a girl like you find her way into Cato's world? Zuri tightened her grip on the napkin in her lap. Every instinct screamed to rise to throw the truth into their faces. I could buy and sell this room 10 times over. I am not your charity project. But she swallowed the fire, her silence becoming both her shield and her prison. She looked at Cato silently, begging him to defend her. But he only leaned back in his chair, chuckling. She was unexpected. A refreshing project, he said lightly, his words dripping with mockery. The table laughed. Her face burned, but she refused to break. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. Dignity is not given, it is chosen. Hold it close even when the world tries to strip it from you. So she chose to sit tall, her chin lifted, though her heart was trembling. The orchestra swelled as Cato extended his hand, pulling her onto the dance floor. Cameras followed their every move. To the crowd, they were magic Cinderella and her prince twirling across marble, their smiles a fairy tale. But beneath his polished grin, Cato's whisper was cruel. You're my charity, Zuri. Don't forget it. Her breath caught. She nearly stumbled, but she didn't stop moving. The cameras must never see her crack. Still inside, the fracture widened. She told herself he didn't mean it, that it was the pressure, the stress, the weight of his family's expectations. She clung desperately to the hope that the man she once loved was still buried beneath this arrogant facade. When the music ended, applause thundered. Cato kissed her hand for the cameras, his performance flawless. The guests sighed, enchanted by the illusion. But when the lights dimmed and the crowd turned away, his grip loosened. "Not bad," he murmured. "At least you didn't trip." That night, as the guests drifted toward the bar and the hall buzzed with chatter, Zuri slipped out onto the balcony. The Nairobi skyline stretched beneath her lights, flickering like stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the tears she refused to shed. The door creaked open behind her. Cato stepped out, a glass of champagne in hand. "You disappeared," he said lightly. "Don't sulk, Zuri. It doesn't look good." She turned, her voice trembling but steady enough to ask, "Why didn't you say anything when your mother insulted me? When Talia mocked me? When you—" She hesitated, swallowing hard. "When you called me your project?" Cato's expression barely flickered. He sipped his drink. "It's just talk. Don't take it seriously." Her chest burned, but before she could reply, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, his tone smooth, almost patronizing. "You're too sensitive. Be proud. You're part of a story the world adores, the billionaire and the poor girl. It makes me look good, and it makes you unforgettable." Zuri searched his eyes, desperate for a glimpse of the man she had once known. But what stared back was not love, only calculation. And in that moment, a seed of doubt began to take root. She stayed silent, watching as he returned to the glittering ballroom, leaving her alone under the night sky. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the cold railing. For years she had believed in love, believed in patience, believed that her silence was strength. But tonight the silence felt heavier than ever. Beneath the laughter drifting from the hall, she whispered to herself, "He'll change. He has to." Yet her voice faltered, and for the first time she wasn't sure she believed it. Far below, the city pulsed with life. Somewhere out there, truths waited to be revealed, secrets hidden in plain sight. And when the time came, the world would see Zuri Adeyemi not as a charity case, but as the woman who could break an empire with a single word. The glow of the ballroom faded, but its echoes followed Zuri back to the Mwangi penthouse, a towering glass fortress above Nairobi that offered the perfect view of the city, yet none of its warmth. The doors shut behind them with a heavy click, and the silence of the suite pressed down like a weight. Cato loosened his tie with a sigh, tossing it carelessly onto a chair. His polished smile from earlier had evaporated, leaving behind a face tight with irritation. "You could at least try harder not to look wounded in front of my family," he muttered, scrolling through his phone, as if she were nothing more than another notification. Zuri sat at the edge of the velvet sofa, still in her gown, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't look wounded," she said softly. "I looked quiet." He glanced at her briefly, his eyes dismissive. "Quiet is boring. You're supposed to shine, Zuri. The world wants inspiration, not silence." Her heart ached. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice fragile but brave. "Do you want me, or just the image of me?" Cato didn't answer. He had already turned back to his phone, the glow of the screen lighting his indifferent face. She stared at him, her throat tightening, and whispered more to herself than to him. "I just want the man I fell in love with back." But the man she loved, the one who used to hold her hand under the stars and promise forever, seemed to vanish a little more each day. The following morning, the sound of heels clicking against marble announced Miriam Mwangi's arrival. She entered the penthouse without knocking, her perfume filling the air before her voice did. "My dear," Miriam said smoothly, as though she owned not only the apartment but Zuri herself. "We need to have a little talk." Zuri offered coffee, a polite attempt at civility, but Miriam waved it away with a gloved hand. Her eyes, sharp and cold, landed squarely on her future daughter-in-law. "Let me be clear," Miriam said, folding her arms. "You are here for appearances, nothing more. My son needs strategy, not sentiment. You're convenient for now, but convenient things never last." Zuri's chest tightened, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "Cato told me he loves me." Miriam laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. "Love, oh darling, love is for the weak. My son doesn't need love, he needs power. He needs a partner who reflects this family's legacy, and you, my dear, do not." The words cut deep, but Zuri didn't let Miriam see her tremble. She remembered her grandmother's counsel whispered long ago under the shade of a baobab tree. The wind will always test the tree's strength. Bend but do not break. In silence there is dignity. So she held her silence, her pride unbroken, even as Miriam swept out of the apartment with her head held high. That night, the penthouse was quiet. Zuri sat at the window watching the city lights flicker like distant fireflies. She clung to a memory Kato laughing with her in a small cafe when no one was watching, brushing flour off her nose as they baked bread together during the pandemic, whispering that she was all he ever needed. She whispered into the silence, "He's still there. He has to be." But when the elevator doors slid open, the man who entered did not carry the warmth of those memories. Kato staggered in late, the sharp scent of perfume clinging to his jacket, expensive floral and not hers. Zuri's stomach knotted. "Where were you?" she asked carefully. "Meetings," he said shortly, avoiding her eyes. "Meetings that end at midnight with perfume that isn't mine." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might confess. But instead he brushed past her, muttering, "Don't start, Zuri. Not tonight." Her breath caught. The cracks in her hope widened, but she forced herself to believe, to stay, to endure. Because walking away would mean admitting that the love she had given was wasted, and she wasn't ready to face that truth. Days turned into weeks. The tabloids painted them as a dream couple, the billionaire heir marries for love, not wealth. Magazine covers showed them hand in hand beneath fairy lights, walking red carpets, their smiles flawless. But behind closed doors, the silence was louder than any applause. At breakfast, Kato scrolled through reports, while Zuri sat in silence. At night, he often returned late, smelling a perfume that didn't belong to her. When she tried to ask questions, he brushed her off. "It's business." "Don't ask." Still, she clung to hope. Still, she whispered to herself in the darkness, "He'll change." But the truth crept closer each day. One evening, Zuri walked into the sitting room and froze. Kato stood by the window, his voice low, warm, in a way she hadn't heard in months. "Yes, I miss you too. Soon, I promise." Her breath caught. When he turned and spotted her, his smile faltered. He ended the call too quickly. "Who was that?" she asked softly. "No one," he replied too fast, his jaw clenched. "Business." But she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. "Imani," she whispered the name, tasting bitter on her tongue. Imani Okoro, his ex, the one his family always preferred, elegant and wealthy, the perfect match. Kato didn't deny it. His silence was enough. Tears stung Zuri's eyes, but she blinked them away. She refused to let him see her break. Not yet. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching her pillow like a lifeline. Her chest hollow, her heart aching, she whispered into the dark, "Maybe he'll remember. Maybe if I stay, he'll change." But the silence answered louder than any words. The next morning, Miriam returned. Her tone was deceptively sweet as she looked Zuri up and down. "Still here? After everything, my dear, you really are a fool." Zuri clenched her hands to keep them from shaking. "I love him. I can't just walk away." Miriam's smile was thin and sharp. "Then you will learn the hard way. But remember, this love doesn't build empires. Power does. And power is something you will never have." When she left, Zuri sank into the nearest chair, her heart pounding. Every word Miriam spoke was poison, but in her silence, Zuri found a strange kind of strength. Because silence wasn't surrender, it was patience. And patience, she reminded herself, was power waiting to be revealed. Later that evening, she met the one person who still treated her with kindness. Amina, the Mwangi family's longtime housekeeper. Amina, with her silver-streaked hair and wise eyes, had served the family for decades. She approached Zuri quietly, pressing a hand to her shoulder. "Child," Amina said gently, "the strongest warriors do not always shout. Sometimes they wait, sometimes they endure. But never forget your dignity is worth more than their approval." Tears pricked Zuri's eyes. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." Amina slipped a small flash drive into her hand. "I thought you might need this. Proof of what they really say when you are not in the room." Zuri held it tightly, her heart racing. Proof of their cruelty. Proof of what she had endured. For the first time in weeks, a spark of resolve flickered in her chest. The cracks in her silence were growing, and soon they would break wide open. That night, as the city slept, and Kato returned late once again, Zuri sat at her desk with Amina's flash drive plugged into her laptop. Voices filled the room, Miriam and Talia's laughter, their scornful words recorded like daggers. "She's nothing," Miriam sneered on the recording. "A charity case." "Kato's little project," Talia added with glee. Zuri closed her eyes, her hand trembling on the mouse. Each word hurt, but it also strengthened her resolve. No more silence. No more pretending. If Kato and his family thought she was powerless, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Because Zuri Adeyemi was not a charity case. She was a storm waiting to break. And when she finally rose, she would bring their empire to its knees. The next morning dawned bright over Nairobi, the sunlight spilling into the penthouse like golden fire. Yet inside the air was heavy thick with secrets. Zuri sat at the edge of the bed, her laptop still open from the night before. The voices from Amina's recording haunted her. Miriam's disdain, Talia's mocking laughter. She had endured so much, but the truth was clearer than ever. This family would never see her as anything but an intruder. Her heart still whispered for Cato, foolish and fragile, urging her to hold on to give him one more chance. But her mind, sharper now, began to wonder, what if love was no longer enough? Later that day, Zuri attended a brunch with Cato's inner circle, a mix of business partners, socialites, and old family friends. The room was filled with polished laughter, the clink of glasses, and the rustle of designer gowns. To the public eye, she was the lucky fiancée of a billionaire heir. To the Mwangi family, she was still a stranger they tolerated only for the cameras. Imani Okoro was there, her presence like a dagger to Zuri's chest. Elegant in a crimson dress, she moved with practiced grace, her smile calculated. She greeted Miriam and Talia with warm embraces, as though she were the true daughter of the family. Miriam's face softened when she saw her, something she had never done for Zuri. Cato's eyes lingered too long on Imani. His smile stretched wider, more genuine than it had in months. Zuri felt her stomach twist. Every glance between them was a thread unraveling the tapestry of lies she had wrapped herself in. When Zuri excused herself to the terrace for air, she overheard a hushed voice. It was Talia whispering to Imani, "Just wait. Once the deal is done, once the papers are signed, Zuri will be out of the picture. Mother's already making plans." Zuri's blood ran cold. The deal. The $950 million contract that Miriam and Cato had been discussing behind closed doors. She hadn't known the details until now. That evening, Zuri confronted Cato. She waited until they were alone, his jacket tossed carelessly on the couch, his cologne lingering in the room. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Cato, tell me the truth. Why am I here? Why do you keep me by your side if all I am is a burden to your family?" Cato's eyes flickered with irritation. He poured himself a drink before answering, his tone cold. "You make me look good, Zuri. The world eats up the story. Billionaire heir chooses love over wealth. It paints me as noble, humble. Investors love it. My family tolerates it. You're useful." The words sliced deeper than any knife. "Useful," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Is that what I am to you? Not a partner? Not the woman you once swore you loved, just useful." He set the glass down with a sharp clink. "Don't make this dramatic. This is business, Zuri, and you play your part well." Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she whispered, "I gave you everything. My love, my loyalty, my silence. And this is what I mean to you." He sighed, impatient. "Enough. Stop with your feelings. They don't matter here. What matters is tomorrow's contract. Smile, play your role, and when this deal is sealed, we'll both have what we need." Her chest hollowed, but a fire flickered deep inside her. She was done begging for scraps of affection. The following day, Zuri visited her grandmother's old estate in the countryside. It had been years since she'd walked those halls, years since she'd touched the earth where her roots were planted. The housekeeper who had cared for her as a child welcomed her warmly, her eyes full of recognition and quiet respect. "You've grown strong, Miss Adeyemi," the woman said softly. Zuri wandered through the gardens, her heart heavy with memories. Under the shade of the baobab tree, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice again. "Remember, child, wealth without respect is emptiness. Love without respect is slavery. Never trade your dignity for anyone's approval." Tears blurred her vision, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of awakening. When she returned to Nairobi, her resolve was sharper than steel. She met with a trusted lawyer, disclosing the truth of her identity as heiress of Adeyemi Holdings. Together they reviewed the upcoming deal, the $950 million contract, and there it was, her name, hidden behind layers of corporate language, as the ultimate signatory. Without her signature, the Mwangi Empire would crumble. With it, they would rise again. The power was hers. It had always been hers. She had simply chosen not to wield it until now. That night, as she entered the penthouse, Amina slipped her another flash drive. This one contained evidence of Cato's late-night rendezvous with Imani, captured by security cameras in one of the Mwangi hotels. Zuri's hands shook as she watched the footage, Cato leaning too close, whispering into Imani's ear, his hand brushing against hers. It was undeniable. The man she had defended again and again was gone, consumed by greed, pride, and lust. Amina placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Child, your silence has been your shield, but now it is time for your voice to become your sword." Zuri nodded, her jaw tight. Yes, it's time. The rehearsal dinner was held 2 days later. Guests arrived in glittering gowns and tailored suits, the air buzzing with champagne and shallow compliments. Zuri wore a pale blue gown, her face serene, though inside her heart thundered with resolve. Talia accidentally stumbled into her, spilling a glass of red wine across her dress. Gasps filled the room. Guests whispered behind their hands. Miriam smirked with satisfaction, while Cato chuckled and raised his glass. Careful, Talia. You'll make people think you did that on purpose. The room laughed. Zuri forced a smile, though her throat burned. The stain spread across her gown, but she stood taller than ever. For the first time, she wasn't humiliated. She was watching, learning, preparing. Because soon the game would end. Later that night, Cato found her on the balcony again. He tried to touch her arm, his voice low, rehearsed. Don't take it so personally. My family can be harsh. But after tomorrow, none of this will matter. We'll be untouchable. You'll see. Zuri turned to him, her eyes unwavering. Tomorrow, she said quietly, everything will change. He smiled, mistaking her words for agreement. He kissed her cheek already, dreaming of his victory. But Zuri knew the truth. Tomorrow the empire he clung to so tightly would begin to crumble. Because tomorrow, she would no longer be silent. The night stretched long, but Zuri did not sleep. She stood at the window, the city glowing beneath her like a constellation of promises. In her hands, she held the flash drive, the contract papers, and her grandmother's necklace, a small silver pendant shaped like a star. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, no longer the girl who endured, but the woman who would rise. When the dawn came, Zuri whispered a vow to herself. No more silence, no more humiliation. Tomorrow the world will see who I truly am. And with that, she prepared for the storm she was about to unleash. The morning of the pre-wedding gala arrived like the stillness before a storm. Nairobi's skyline glistened under the sun, the towers casting long shadows over the bustling streets below. Inside the Mwangi family's Serengeti hotel, preparations were frantic florists, hurried to arrange orchids, waiters, polished crystal glasses, and photographers tested their lenses for the spectacle of the year. To the public, this night would be the pinnacle of romance, the union of billionaire heir Cato Mwangi and the girl from humble beginnings, Zuri. But Zuri woke with her heart, armored her mind, sharpened by the revelations of the past weeks. Gone was the girl who whispered to herself that he'll change. What remained was a woman ready to wield the truth. She slipped the flash drive Amina had given her into her clutch, along with her grandmother's silver star pendant. It was more than jewelry. It was an anchor to her dignity, a reminder of the values that wealth and power could never erase. When she descended to the hotel's grand ballroom later that evening, heads turned. The gown she chose was silver silk, fluid like water, yet strong as steel in its impression. Miriam and Talia exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Cato, already surrounded by investors, flashed his polished smile and rushed to her side, placing a hand on her back for the cameras. Perfect timing, he whispered through clenched teeth. Remember your role. Zuri smiled faintly, her lips curving but her eyes unreadable. Tonight the role will be mine to define, she thought. The gala was a performance from the start. The orchestra played swelling melodies, and society's elite politicians, CEOs, and international journalists mingled with champagne flutes in hand. Photographers snapped away, capturing every glance, every touch between Cato and Zuri. To the crowd, they were Kenya's golden couple. At the head table, Miriam raised her glass, her words sharp, though coated in silk. To Cato and Zuri, may this union bring strength to our family legacy. The crowd cheered, but Miriam's gaze lingered on Zuri with a warning. Stay silent, know your place. But Zuri no longer flinched. She held Miriam's gaze and lifted her own glass steady as stone. Talia, meanwhile, played her usual games. As Zuri sat, Talia leaned close, her voice dripping with cruelty. That dress is lovely. Shame it won't matter when you're gone. My brother always finds his way back to where he belongs. You're just a chapter in his story. Zuri kept her smile calm, but her fingers brushed against the flash drive in her clutch. Not a chapter, she thought. The ending. As the evening unfolded, the investors unveiled thick folders, the long-awaited $950 million contract. For weeks, rumors had swirled about this deal. The Mwangi Group's debts had been rising, their empire faltering, but this contract was their salvation. And the world believed Zuri was simply the pretty face beside Cato, the poor girl who had lucked into wealth. Cato leaned close, pressing a pen into her hand. His whisper was urgent. Sign gracefully. This is what you're here for. But Zuri didn't move. Her eyes swept the ballroom, politicians, business moguls, journalists, and the Mwangi family seated proudly at the head table. Every face was expectant, every camera poised. And she remembered every humiliation, every cruel word project charity case of nobody. Her grandmother's voice returned like wind through the baobab leaves. Never trade your dignity for anyone's approval. Zuri rose to her feet. The room hushed. Her voice calm, but carrying like thunder, broke the silence. Before I sign anything, she said, there is something you all need to know. The crowd shifted uneasily. Cato's smile stiffened. Zuri, sit down, he hissed under his breath. But she did not. She stepped forward, her silver gown catching the light. My name is not simply Zuri, she continued. It is Zuri Adeyemi. Gasps rippled through the room. Flashes burst from cameras. Miriam shot to her feet, her face pale. What nonsense is this? She snapped. Zuri's gaze swept across them, steady and unbroken. I am the sole heiress of Adeyemi Holdings, the very conglomerate this contract depends on. You all thought I was a poor girl clinging to wealth, but the truth is this. Without me, this deal does not exist. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions, investors murmured furiously among themselves. Cato's face drained of color, his mask cracking as he turned to her. What are you doing? He demanded, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. Zuri met his eyes, her chin high. Ending the lie. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. Miriam's voice rose above the noise, sharp as a whip. She's bluffing. Do not listen to her. But the investors stepped forward, their expressions grim. She speaks the truth, one of them said. Without her signature, this contract is worthless. Zuri placed the pen back onto the table untouched. I do not sign contracts with men who mistake cruelty for class or power for love. This deal is canceled. The words fell like a hammer. Gasps echoed. Investors slammed their folders shut and stormed out, their shoes clicking against the marble like thunder. Photographers captured every moment, Zuri standing tall, Cato crumbling beside her. No! Cato shouted, desperation breaking through his arrogance. He grabbed her arm, his voice raw. You can't do this. You need me. Zuri pulled her hand free, her voice steady. No, Cato, you needed me, and you threw me away. The Mwangi name unraveled before their eyes. Phones buzzed with alerts as headlines exploded across social media. Bride reveals, hidden identity cancels, $950M, deal Mwangi empire in jeopardy. Miriam's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table. Talia stood frozen, her smirk wiped clean. Imani, watching from the crowd, turned her face away in sudden shame. But Kato was the most broken of all. The man who had always commanded the room now stood, reduced, his voice hoarse with desperation. Zuri, please, don't ruin us. I'll change. I'll treat you better. Just sign it. We can still have everything. Her heart twisted for a fleeting moment. Once those words might have melted her, but now she saw them for what they were, not love, but survival. You're not begging for me, she said quietly. You're begging for your empire. He faltered, unable to deny it. The room, once filled with applause, now watched in stunned silence as Cato Mwangi, the heir to one of the nation's great dynasties, collapsed at the feet of the woman he had mocked. Zuri stood tall, serene, and unshaken, her grandmother's pendant gleaming against her gown. The cameras captured her strength, her dignity, her defiance. And with calm finality, she whispered the words that sealed his fate. Respect costs nothing. Without it, even empires fall. She turned and walked out of the ballroom, her gown trailing behind her like silver fire, leaving the Mwangi family to choke on the ruins of their arrogance. But Zuri did not disappear into the night. The following day, she redirected the Adeyemi Holdings Rescue Fund, not to the Mwangi Empire, but to its workers, suppliers, and small businesses who would otherwise collapse in the fallout. Her actions were splashed across headlines. Heiress turns down, billionaire Groom saves, thousands of jobs. The world no longer saw her as a charity case. They saw her as what she truly was, power wrapped in grace, a woman who turned shame into strength. And though her heart ached for what she had once believed love could be, she knew the truth. Love without respect was nothing, and dignity once reclaimed could never again be surrendered. The fallout from the gala reverberated through Nairobi like an earthquake. Headlines dominated every newsstand, every mobile feed, every television screen. Heiress breaks silence, Mwangi empire crumbles. Zuri Adeyemi cancels, $950M deal workers await rescue, billionaire Groom humiliated in front of the world. The Mwangi name, once gilded with prestige, became synonymous with arrogance and decline overnight. Stock prices plummeted in real time. Investors abandoned ship. Politicians who once clung to Miriam Mwangi's influence now dodged her calls. Inside the Mwangi penthouse, tensions simmered like poison. Kato raged, slamming glasses against walls, blaming everyone but himself. Miriam sat rigid in her chair, staring into nothing, her pride broken but her voice still sharp. Talia wept, her mascara streaking down her face. And Imani, though she had tried to stay quietly, slipped away, leaving Kato's side without a word. But while their empire collapsed, Zuri's star rose. Adeyemi Holdings issued a statement the next morning, clarifying her identity and vowing to protect innocent workers caught in the crossfire. Our responsibility, the statement read, is to people, not empires. The words spread like wildfire, and for the first time, the name Adeyemi was not only whispered in hushed boardrooms, but celebrated on the streets. Yet Zuri was not content with headlines alone. She summoned her board of directors to an emergency meeting in the Adeyemi Tower, a glass skyscraper that gleamed in the heart of Nairobi. As she walked into the boardroom, her presence commanded silence. Gone was the woman forced to shrink under scorn. Now she radiated calm authority. "We will not abandon the people who depended on the Mwangi group," she began. "They were pawns in a cruel game, but they will not pay the price for arrogance. We have the resources to protect them, and we will." Effective immediately, Adeyemi Holdings will establish a worker rescue trust. The directors exchanged surprised glances. "Madam Adeyemi," one of them said carefully, "do you understand the cost? This is billions. It will delay other expansions." Zuri met his gaze firmly. "And what is the cost of doing nothing? Thousands of families on the streets, schools closed, communities broken. My grandmother built this empire on the principle that wealth means nothing if it does not lift others. I intend to honor that." Her words struck silence into the room before a ripple of nods followed. One by one, the directors voiced their agreement. The trust was approved unanimously. Meanwhile, deep within the Mwangi Group offices, a darker plot unraveled. The CFO, Sefu Kamau, had been quietly manipulating numbers for months, covering the company's debts while funneling funds into offshore accounts. His goal was simple: when the Mwangi Empire collapsed, he would emerge rich, leaving everyone else in ruin. But Zuri's revelations had accelerated the implosion. Sefu's fraud could no longer stay hidden. Investigators, emboldened by the chaos, began following the money trail. Within days, the scandal widened. Forged contracts, phantom subsidiaries, and payments to shell companies traced back to Sefu's name. The news broke like another bombshell: Mwangi CFO investigated for fraud amid empire collapse. Zuri read the headline with quiet resolve. She had suspected corruption, but now the proof was undeniable. She arranged a discreet meeting with government auditors, offering Adeyemi Holdings cooperation to ensure workers were shielded while justice was pursued. That evening, Amina visited Zuri at her estate. The older woman's eyes shone with pride as she handed her a small leather notebook. "Your grandmother's," Amina said softly. "She wanted you to have it when the time was right." Zuri opened the worn pages, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. One line leapt out at her: "Strength is not measured by what you endure in silence, but by what you choose to speak when silence becomes injustice." Tears welled in Zuri's eyes. Her grandmother had known even then that this moment would come. "I almost lost myself," Zuri whispered. "But I see now. Love without respect is a prison. Silence without purpose is chains. I will never wear them again." Amina placed a hand over hers. "You are free now, child. And freedom is the sharpest sword." The next day, Zuri stood before a crowd of Mwangi Group workers, men and women whose futures had been thrown into uncertainty. They gathered in a vast factory floor, their eyes weary with fear. Cameras filmed the moment, and the world watched. Zuri stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "I know you have been abandoned. I know you fear for your families, your livelihoods. But I promise you this: you will not be left behind. Adeyemi Holdings will secure your wages, your benefits, and your future. Not as charity, but as justice." The workers erupted into applause, tears streaming down their faces. A mother with a child in her arms whispered, "She saved us." A man who had worked for the Mwangis for 30 years shouted, "May the Adeyemi name live forever." It was not the praise that moved Zuri, but the knowledge that dignity, hers and theirs, had been restored. But the Mwangi family was not finished. Miriam, stripped of her influence, grew bitter and desperate. She summoned Kato and Talia into the shattered remains of their boardroom. "This is not the end," she hissed. "The Adeyemis humiliated us. They destroyed everything. We cannot let them win." Talia's voice wavered. "Mother, it's over. We lost the investors, the deal, the press. Everyone's against us." Miriam slammed her hand against the table. "No. We still have the truth. Zuri hid her identity. She deceived us all. We will expose her as a liar, a manipulator. We will make the world hate her as much as they hate us. Kato sat silently, his eyes hollow. His arrogance had drained away, leaving behind only a shell of a man. Finally he muttered, "It won't work. They don't hate her, they love her. And she was never the liar I was." Miriam stared at him, shocked by the weakness in his voice. But Talia said nothing. For the first time, she seemed to doubt her mother's path. Meanwhile, the storm outside only strengthened Zuri's resolve. She had stood before the world and claimed her identity. She had refused humiliation. She had chosen dignity over illusion. But deep within, she knew the battle was not yet over. The Mwangi name still lingered, still threatened to drag others into its ruin. And somewhere in the shadows, Sefu Kamau was desperate enough to lash out before the law caught him. As Zuri stood on the balcony of her estate, the night wind brushing against her skin, she whispered to the stars, "This is only the beginning." And far across the city in a dimly lit office, Sefu slammed his fist against his desk. "If the Adiemis think they can destroy me, they'll learn what real ruin looks like." The next chapter was already being written, one of betrayal, justice, and the final reckoning. Nairobi's skyline glittered under the night sky, but beneath the city's brilliance, storms brewed unseen. The Mwangi Empire was collapsing, yet for Sefu Kamau, the CFO, whose fingerprints stained every fraudulent ledger, this was no surrender. It was survival. Inside his office, dimly lit and lined with files, no one dared touch. Sefu stared at the news ticker rolling across his television. His name was already beginning to circulate. "Investigations underway," it read. His jaw tightened. If the truth surfaced, his years of siphoning funds into secret accounts in Dubai and Mauritius would be exposed. He could not let that happen. "Zuri Adeyemi," he muttered bitterly. The name burned in his throat. She had dismantled the Mwangi deal with a single revelation, and now her board was moving in on every weakness. If she continued, she wouldn't just ruin the Mwangi name, she would drag him down too. But Sefu had one advantage: information. For years, he had served as the Mwangi family's shadow, privy to their secrets, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their enemies. He began drafting a plan, leak stories about Zuri's manipulation, stir public doubt, and turn her heroism into a scandal. If he could poison her image, he might distract the world long enough to disappear with his hidden millions. Meanwhile, at the Adeyemi estate, Zuri sat in her study, reviewing files with her lawyer and a trusted board member, a man named Kioni Mwenda. The flash drive Amina had given her still lay on the desk, proof of the Mwangi family's cruelty. But tonight her focus was on the Workers' Rescue Trust. Kioni adjusted his glasses, speaking cautiously. "Madam, the trust is approved, but Sefu is already moving against us. He's been calling journalists, trying to paint you as deceitful, claiming you lured the Mwangis into the contract under false pretenses." Zuri leaned back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly on her grandmother's silver pendant. Her voice was calm but unyielding. "Let him try. The truth is my shield. I never lied about who I was. I simply chose not to reveal it until the time was right. That is not deceit. That is strategy." Her lawyer nodded but added, "We should prepare. He may have more than words. If he's desperate enough, he'll dig for anything: old rumors, personal stories, even half-truths. Men like Sefu don't go quietly." Zuri's eyes hardened. "Then neither will I." Across town, Kato Mwangi sat alone in the ruins of his penthouse. Empty bottles littered the floor. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the city that once adored him. His phone buzzed endlessly. Journalists, creditors, former friends, now turned vultures. He ignored them all. For the first time, he faced the reflection of his choices. He had mocked the woman who loved him, paraded her as an accessory, betrayed her with Imani, and bowed to his mother's cruelty. And now he had nothing. Not Zuri, not investors, not even Imani, who had vanished the moment the scandal broke. When Talia entered quietly, her eyes swollen from crying, she barely recognized her brother. His once polished suit was wrinkled, his face shadowed with exhaustion. "Kato," she whispered, "what will we do?" He laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. "Do? There's nothing left to do. She destroyed us." Talia hesitated, then whispered, "No, we destroyed ourselves." Her words lingered in the silence, sharper than any accusation. The following day, Zuri made an unannounced visit to one of the Mwangi factories now at risk of closure. Workers gathered anxiously, children clinging to their parents' sides. Rumors had spread of unpaid wages and lost pensions. When Zuri stepped onto the makeshift stage, the crowd fell silent. She wore no diamonds, no gowns, only a simple dress, her hair tied back. Her presence alone commanded respect. "I know you are afraid," she began, her voice steady. afraid of losing homes of hunger of broken promises. The Mwangi Empire has fallen, but you will not fall with it. Adeyemi Holdings has pledged to protect your wages, your futures, your dignity, not because you are charity, but because you are the backbone of this nation. Tears welled in the eyes of many. A man stepped forward, his hands calloused from decades on the assembly line. You've done what they never did, he said hoarsely. You saw us. The crowd erupted in cheers, and in that moment, Zuri felt the truth deep in her bones. She was no longer fighting for herself. She was fighting for every voice silenced, every worker dismissed, as expendable, every person humiliated into silence. But as her influence grew, so did Sefu's desperation. That night he arranged a secret meeting with Miriam Mwangi. The once mighty matriarch looked worn, her pride cracked, but not gone. You still want revenge? Sefu asked smoothly, sliding a folder across the table. Miriam's eyes flashed. What is this? Proof, Sefu said. Financial dealings tied to Adeyemi Holdings that the press will eat alive. They'll believe Zuri manipulated the deal to crush you. With the right spin, she won't be a heroine, she'll be a viper. Miriam's lips curled into a bitter smile. And what do you want in return? Silence, Sefu replied. When I disappear with what's mine, you look the other way. Miriam hesitated. She despised Zuri, but deep down, she knew the truth. Her empire's fall had not been Zuri's doing alone. It had been pride, cruelty, and blindness. Yet pride was a stubborn thing. If it destroys her, Miriam whispered, I'll do it. At the estate, Amina warned Zuri. The older woman had her own network of quiet informants, and whispers of Sefu's plot had reached her ears. Child, Amina said gravely, they are planning to twist your story. They will call you a liar, a deceiver, a thief. You must be ready. Zuri nodded, her resolve unshaken. Then I'll give them the truth before they can twist it. Tomorrow we call a press conference. Let the world hear my story from my own lips. The next afternoon, the largest hall in Adeyemi Tower filled with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning. Zuri stepped to the podium, her grandmother's pendant glinting against her simple navy dress. I have been silent long enough, she began, her voice echoing across the hall. The world believes I was a poor girl rescued by wealth. That was a lie, just not mine. I chose to hide my name because I wanted to be seen for who I am, not what I own. But when cruelty mocked me, when betrayal silenced me, I remembered my grandmother's words. Strength is not in silence when silence becomes injustice. She raised her head, her voice firm. Yes, I am the heir of Adeyemi Holdings. Yes, I ended a deal worth $950 million. I did so because no contract is worth signing when built on disrespect and deceit. And if that truth makes me the villain to some, so be it. I would rather be hated for protecting dignity than loved for betraying it. The room erupted in applause. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters shouted questions, but the story was already written. Zuri Adeyemi speaks truth over power. Far away, watching the broadcast on his television, Kato buried his face in his hands. Tears he could no longer contain spilled freely. For the first time, he understood what he had lost, not just wealth, but the love of a woman who had been stronger than he ever deserved. And in another corner of the city, Sefu cursed under his breath. His plan was crumbling, his lies collapsing before they could even take root. She's smarter than I thought, he muttered. But desperation makes dangerous men. And Sifu was far from finished. The battle was shifting from humiliation and betrayal to survival and justice. And Zuri, once the silent bride mocked at a dinner table, was now the storm standing between truth and ruin. The city of Nairobi buzzed like a hive. Every cafe, every office, every market stall hummed with the same conversation. Zuri Adeyemi's stand against the Mwangi Empire. She had gone from a woman mocked as a charity case to a heroine who embodied dignity and power. But in the shadows, danger stirred. Sefu Kamau paced his office late into the night, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The press conference had undone him. Every thread of deceit he had spun unraveled when Zuri spoke the truth so plainly, so unshakably. Investors once cautious now flooded to Adeyemi Holdings. Meanwhile, government investigators sharpened their knives, circling his accounts like vultures. He poured a glass of whiskey with shaking hands. If I go down, he whispered, she goes down with me. He opened his laptop and pulled up a series of files, old business agreements, where Adeyemi Holdings had partnered with companies later accused of corruption. Though the Adeyemi name had never been implicated, Sefu planned to distort the narrative. With selective leaks, he could make Zuri appear complicit. His only hope now was to drag her into the mud before the law reached him. At the Adeyemi estate, Zuri prepared for the next phase of her fight. The Worker Rescue Trust had already begun dispersing funds, ensuring salaries were paid and pensions protected. Families who had once feared ruin now praised her name in the streets. Yet she knew the war wasn't won. Her confidant Keone Mwenda spread a series of documents across the table. "Madam, we've traced Sefu's offshore accounts. If we release this evidence, the government will have enough to charge him with fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion." But, he hesitated. Zuri raised an eyebrow. "But what?" Keone sighed. "He is desperate. Cornered men don't fight fair. If we move, he will strike back with whatever he has." Amina, seated quietly in the corner, spoke up, her voice, gentle but firm. "Child, the question is not whether he will fight back. The question is, are you ready to stand even when the fight turns ugly?" Zuri touched the silver star pendant resting on her chest. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Strength is not silence when silence becomes injustice." Her answer was clear. "Release the files," she said. "Let the truth speak louder than his lies." The next morning the headlines exploded. CFO Sefu Kamau, accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. Evidence links Sefu to offshore accounts. Authorities begin crackdown. Crowds gathered outside government buildings demanding justice. The Mwangi workers, once victims of silence, raised their voices in protest, chanting for accountability. But Sefu was quick to strike back. That same afternoon, an anonymous leak surfaced online. Documents, half true and half forged, claimed Zuri had signed contracts years ago with companies later exposed for illegal practices. Social media swirled with confusion. "Is she really who she says she is?" one commentator asked on live television. "Maybe she's no different from the Mwangis," another speculated. The seed of doubt had been planted. Zuri watched the reports with calm eyes, though her chest tightened. "So this is his game," she murmured. Her lawyer, pacing the room, was less composed. "This could tarnish everything you've built. If the public believes you knowingly partnered with criminals..." Zuri cut him off, her voice steady. "Then we show them the whole truth. Not rumors, not fragments, everything." That evening she called for another press conference, her second in less than a week. Cameras flashed as she stood before the crowd, once again her posture unyielding. "Yes," she said firmly, "Adeyemi Holdings partnered with companies that were later accused of corruption. But let me be clear, we withdrew the moment those accusations were proven. We lost money to protect integrity, because integrity is worth more than profit. Unlike others, we did not hide, we did not bribe, and we did not deceive." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I will not apologize for mistakes we corrected with transparency. I will not be silenced by cowards who thrive in shadows. If this is the price of standing tall, I will pay it. But I will not kneel." The hall erupted in applause. Even reporters who had come ready to scrutinize found themselves moved. Her defiance became yet another headline: "Zuri Adeyemi dignity is worth more than profit." But the attacks didn't stop. Sefu escalated. Late-night messages flooded social media, accusing Zuri of arrogance, elitism, and hypocrisy. Anonymous bots spread hashtags demanding her resignation. Miriam Mwangi fueled the fire by granting a bitter interview to a tabloid, claiming Zuri deceived us all. She's no savior, she's a schemer. Yet for every lie, truth rose stronger. Workers who had received their first paychecks in months filmed videos thanking her. Mothers spoke of buying food again. Fathers spoke of keeping their children in school. Their voices went viral, drowning out the noise of slander. "She saved us when no one else would," one woman said in a trembling voice. "That's not arrogance. That's grace." Meanwhile, Kato Mwangi watched the chaos unfold from his penthouse, his face hollow. He had tried calling Zuri several times, but she never answered. He drafted letters of apology, only to tear them apart in shame. One night, he ventured out into the streets trying to blend with the crowd. He heard workers chanting Zuri's name, praising her courage. He saw vendors discussing her defiance with admiration. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of what he had lost. When he returned home, Talia confronted him. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "Brother, is this what we've become?" Reduced to whispers and bitterness while she stands like a queen before the world. Kato sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. "I thought I was the prince in her story," he whispered, "but I was the villain." The following week, government officials announced formal charges against Sefu. The evidence from Adeyemi Holdings had been irrefutable. His accounts were frozen, his passport seized. Yet, even as the walls closed in, Sefu refused to surrender. He hired men to intimidate Zuri, sending threats cloaked in shadows. Anonymous letters slipped under her door, a car parked too long outside her estate, Strange calls in the middle of the night. Amina noticed first. They are watching you, she warned. Zuri's response was unflinching. Let them watch. If they think fear will silence me, they have not learned who I am. Still, her board urged caution. Keone placed security guards at her estate, ensuring she was never alone. But inside, Zuri knew this battle was no longer about contracts or empires. It was about dignity versus corruption, light versus darkness. And she would not bow. That weekend, she addressed a crowd of thousands in Uhuru Park. Families, workers, students, and journalists filled the open space, their voices merging in anticipation. Zuri stepped onto the stage, the wind lifting her hair, her pendant glinting in the sunlight. I was once mocked as nothing, she began. A charity case, a project, a poor girl clinging to wealth. But I endured not because I was powerless, but because I wanted to see who truly valued me for me. Now I know. Respect is not given, it is earned. And those who cannot respect others, no matter how rich or powerful, will see their empires fall. The crowd roared. Cheers echoed across the park. And to those still plotting in shadows, she continued, her voice sharp, as steel. Know this truth walks in daylight, lies rot in darkness, and no matter how you fight, you cannot silence what is already awake. The crowd erupted, chanting her name, their voices rising like thunder. From his hiding place, Sefu watched the broadcast, his face twisted in rage. She thinks she's won, he spat. But this war isn't over. He opened his drawer and pulled out one last file, a weapon he had saved for the end. Inside lay confidential details of Zuri's personal life secrets no one else knew. If he released them, he could shatter her image once and for all. His hand trembled as he stared at the papers. If I go down, he whispered again, she burns with me. But across the city, Zuri stood in the sunlight, her heart steady. She had faced humiliation, betrayal, and lies. She had risen from silence to defiance. And she was ready whatever storm came next. The days that followed Zuri's public speech at Uhuru Park were filled with both triumph and tension. Nairobi streets carried her name like a hymn. Children painted Zuri on walls and vendors proudly played radio broadcasts, replaying her words. She had become more than a woman, she was a symbol of resilience. Yet beneath this rising tide of admiration, a darker current swirled. Sefu Kamau was cornered desperate, and men like him were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. In his hidden apartment on the outskirts of the city, Sefu stared at the file that could shatter everything Zuri had built. It contained fragments of her past financial records and personal letters, some true, some twisted, others completely fabricated. He had acquired them through years of shadow work within Nairobi's elite circles, always keeping weapons in reserve. Public opinion is fickle, he muttered, pacing the room. They worship her now, but with one whisper they'll turn. Yet doubt gnawed at him. He remembered Zuri's speech, the way her words carried like thunder. She didn't just have money, she had the people. Could even his poison undo that? He shook off the thought. Everyone has a weakness, he told himself. I'll find hers. At the Adeyemi estate, Zuri sat with her closest advisors, Keone, her lawyer, and Amina. The atmosphere was tense but determined. Reports had confirmed that Sefu was planning something. His bank accounts were frozen, his name dragged through the mud, but still, he refused to vanish quietly. We need to anticipate his next move, Keone said, tapping the table. He's already tried to smear you once. If he leaks something personal, even fabricated, it could damage the trust you've built. Zuri leaned forward, her eyes steady. Then let him. I will not live my life fearing lies. If he attacks my past, we answer with transparency. If he twists my truth, we counter with facts. But I will not stoop to his level. Amina, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. Child, remember, truth is powerful, but perception is fragile. The people love you now, but fear spreads faster than love. Be ready to hold steady when shadows move. Zuri nodded. I am ready. That night, the attack began. Anonymous blogs splashed headlines across the internet. Zuri Adeyemi hid illegal deals in the past. Social media accounts circulated snippets of documents, some showing her family's past connections with controversial businesses. Though many were already disproven or out of context, the noise was deafening. By dawn, talk shows debated her integrity. Is she really the heroine we think, one host asked, or has she simply fooled us all? The Worker Rescue Trust staff fielded calls from anxious families. Even loyal supporters hesitated. The tide threatened to turn. Zuri watched the storm unfold from her study. Her hands folded calmly in her lap, but inside her heart ached. It wasn't just the lies, it was the thought of her grandmother's legacy being tarnished, of every sacrifice twisted into suspicion. Amina entered quietly, setting down a cup of tea. This is his last strike, child. He wants you broken before he falls. Zuri lifted her eyes. Then I won't break. That afternoon, she called for an emergency address. Reporters filled the Adeyemi Tower, once again, cameras clicking furiously. Zuri stepped forward, her pendant glinting under the lights. You've heard the rumors, she began, her voice steady. You've seen the papers. Let me tell you the truth. Yes, my family has made business partnerships across Africa. Yes, some of those companies later fell into scandal. But when wrongdoing was uncovered, we cut ties. We lost profits rather than betray principles. That is not shame, it is honor. She paused, letting her words sink in. Do not be fooled by those who cling to shadows. They fear the light because the light exposes them. I will not apologize for protecting dignity. I will not apologize for choosing integrity over wealth. If that makes me imperfect, then I embrace imperfection. Because imperfection with honesty is better than perfection built on lies. The hall was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Journalists tweeted her words instantly, and within hours, hashtags supporting her outnumbered the smear campaigns. Meanwhile, Sefu watched the broadcast from his apartment, fury boiling in his veins. His plan, his carefully crafted assault, had failed. Again, he threw the file across the room, papers scattering like ashes. They'll never see her for what she is, he spat. They're blinded by their adoration. His phone buzzed. It was Miriam Mwangi. Her voice crackled with bitterness. She destroyed us, Sefu. And now she's destroying you too. Sefu's voice was venomous. Then we destroy her together. But Miriam's silence stretched long. At last she whispered, no, I've lost enough. My son lost everything because of pride and cruelty. Maybe it's time I accept that we did this to ourselves. And with that, she ended the call. Sefu stood frozen, the betrayal cutting deep. Even Miriam, hardened and proud, had surrendered. He was alone. Back at the estate, Zuri allowed herself a rare moment of rest. She walked through the gardens, the night air cool against her skin. Stars glittered above, and she held her pendant tightly. Her thoughts wandered to Kato. Despite everything, a part of her still mourned the man she once believed he was. She remembered their laughter, their dreams whispered under starlit skies. But those dreams had been crushed under arrogance and deceit. Now all that remained was a hollow ache, a reminder that love without respect was a mirage. Yet even in that ache, she felt something new, freedom. She had shed the prison of silence, the weight of humiliation. She was no longer the girl mocked at a dinner table. She was the woman who had stood before the world and spoken truth. 2 days later, government officials announced formal charges against Sefu Kamau: fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. His trial would begin within weeks. Crowds cheered in the streets when the news broke. Justice, they cried. No more shadows. Zuri watched the coverage quietly, her expression serene. Ina joined her, smiling faintly. It is ending, child. The storm is passing, but Zuri shook her head gently. Storms don't just pass, Amina. They leave lessons behind. The question is, will we learn from them? That evening, she addressed the nation one last time. Standing on the steps of Adeyemi Tower, she looked out at the crowd, workers, students, families, all waiting for her words. I have walked through humiliation, she said, her voice rising. I have endured betrayal. I have been mocked, dismissed, and treated as nothing. But I stand here today to tell you this dignity is not given, it is chosen. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. And love without respect is nothing more than chains. The crowd roared their voices, a wave of affirmation. I am no savior, she continued. I am a woman who refused to kneel. And if my story means anything, let it remind you your worth is not measured by the voices that belittle you, but by the truth you choose to carry. Applause thundered, echoing into the night sky. In a dark cell awaiting trial, Sefu sat hunched over his empire of lies and ruins. In another corner of the city, Miriam Mwangi locked herself in her mansion pride, broken her family name, a relic. And Kato, alone in his penthouse, stared at the city lights, whispering the name of the woman he had lost forever. Zuri, meanwhile, stood tall beneath the stars. The battle had scarred her, yes, but it had also forged her into something unbreakable. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled, not with bitterness, but with peace. Because she had not only survived the storm, she had become it. The trial of Sefu Kamau began under the blistering Nairobi sun, the courthouse steps overflowing with reporters, protesters, and onlookers hungry for justice. Camera crews camped outside for hours, hoping to capture even a glimpse of the disgraced CFO. Inside, the air was thick with tension as lawyers prepared their cases and government prosecutors pored over the damning evidence provided by Adeyemi Holdings. For Zuri, it was a strange feeling to sit in the gallery no longer as the woman mocked and dismissed, but as the silent force behind the investigation. She wore a modest cream suit, her grandmother's pendant resting just above her heart. Every eye in the room seemed to glance toward her, as if she embodied the trial's true gravity. Sefu entered in handcuffs, his once impeccable suits replaced by a plain gray uniform. His eyes burned with fury, darting around the room until they landed on Zuri. His lips curled into a sneer. She did not flinch. She met his gaze calmly, her silence louder than any insult. The judge called the court to order. The first witness was a government auditor who laid bare the intricate web of fraud. Sefu had spun shell companies in Mauritius, forged invoices, offshore accounts, fattened by stolen millions. Charts and documents flashed across the screens, a portrait of greed, meticulously painted. The crowd murmured in shock. Zuri felt her stomach tighten, not from surprise, but from the sheer audacity of it all. Sefu had not only stolen money, he had stolen livelihoods, dreams, futures. Families had starved while he siphoned wealth into secret vaults. Outside the courthouse, the Mwangi family's downfall deepened. Miriam Mwangi, once the grande dame of Nairobi high society, had vanished from public life. Rumors swirled of her retreating into her gated mansion, seeing no one but her lawyers. Talia had left the city altogether, fleeing to Europe in shame. And Cato, oh Cato, his name still trailed hers like a ghost. Paparazzi caught him wandering Nairobi's nightlife, drinking heavily, his face unshaven, his eyes vacant. Headlines read, "Former billionaire heir a shadow of himself." One evening, Zuri returned home to find a letter waiting at her gate. It was handwritten, shaky, almost desperate. She recognized the scrawl. Instantly it was Cato's. "Zuri, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that now. I destroyed the one thing that was real in my life. I let my pride, my family, and my greed blind me. Every day I see your face on the news standing taller than I ever imagined, and I realize you were always the stronger one. You loved me when I gave you nothing but pain. If I could go back, I would choose differently. But I can't. All I can say is I'm sorry. For everything. Cato." Zuri sat quietly after reading it, the city lights flickering beyond her window. A part of her still ached for the boy. He had been the one who once held her hand under starlight before power twisted him. But she knew apologies, however, heartfelt, could not undo betrayal. Love without respect had no soil to grow in. She folded the letter gently and locked it away, not out of anger but closure. The trial dragged on for weeks. Witness after witness testified: factory workers whose pensions vanished, accountants forced to forge numbers, executives coerced into silence. Each story was another brick in the wall of Sefu's guilt. His defense tried to spin it differently. They painted him as a scapegoat, a loyal servant, carrying out the Mwangi family's dirty work. They suggested Zuri herself had orchestrated events to destroy her rivals. When Zuri was called to the stand, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. She walked calmly to the witness chair, her pendant gleaming under the lights. The defense lawyer pounced. "Miss Adeyemi, isn't it true that your decision to reveal your identity and cancel the contract was less about justice and more about personal vengeance against the Mwangi family?" Zuri met his gaze, her voice steady. "No, it was about dignity. A contract signed under humiliation and cruelty is not a partnership, it is bondage. I will not bind my name or my family's to men who mistake arrogance for leadership." The lawyer smirked. "And yet by doing so, you destroyed their empire." Zuri's answer was sharp as steel. "No, they destroyed it themselves. I merely refused to save it." The gallery erupted in murmurs of approval. The judge banged his gavel for silence, but even he could not suppress the weight of her words. Outside, the tide turned fully. Workers rallied behind her, students carried placards reading "Truth over Power." Influential business leaders began echoing her stance, pledging reforms in corporate transparency. But Sefu grew more erratic. On the fourth week of the trial, he exploded in the courtroom, shouting at Zuri, "You think you've won? You think the world will always love you? They'll turn on you. They always do. You're nothing without their praise." The judge ordered guards to restrain him, but Zuri did not flinch. She looked at him with quiet pity. "I am nothing without my dignity," she said softly. "That is something you never understood." Her words silenced even his rage. The verdict came on a sweltering Friday afternoon. The jury filed in, the judge's voice echoing through the packed courtroom. "On the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed by cheers outside that shook the courthouse walls. Reporters rushed to deliver the breaking news: Sefu Kamau convicted, faces 25 years in prison. Zuri closed her eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in release. Justice had spoken. Sefu slumped in his seat, the sneer gone, replaced by hollow defeat. As guards led him away, he cast one last look at Zuri, but this time she did not meet his eyes. He was already history. That night, Nairobi erupted in celebration. Fireworks lit the sky not just for Zuri, but for the workers who would finally see justice. Streets filled with dancing drums, beating voices singing her name. Zuri stood on the balcony of Adeyemi Tower, watching the city she loved rejoice. Amina stood beside her, her eyes glistening. "Your grandmother would be proud," she whispered. Zuri smiled faintly. This was never just about me. It was about all of us, the workers, the families, everyone who was told they were nothing. Now they know they are everything. She looked out over the skyline, her pendant glowing softly in the moonlight. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. Respect, she knew, was the foundation of any empire worth building. Without it, even the mightiest names crumbled. And as the city sang her name into the night, Zuri whispered a vow to herself. The Adeyemi legacy will never forget this lesson. Not while I breathe. But deep in the shadows of Nairobi, another figure watched the celebrations with quiet calculation. A former Mwangi ally, untouched by the trial, whispered to his confidants. The fall of the Mwangis is only the beginning. Power never disappears, it only shifts. And where there is power, there is always someone waiting to claim it. Zuri's war had been won. But the game of power was far from over. The dust of the trial had barely settled when Nairobi awoke to a new reality. The Mwangi Empire was shattered, its once glittering towers, dimmed by scandal and shame. Sefu Kamau, the shadow who had siphoned wealth from countless families, was behind bars. Cato and his mother Miriam had retreated into silence, their names whispered with pity rather than respect. But for Zuri Adeyemi, this was not an ending, it was a beginning. In the weeks that followed the verdict, she poured her energy into rebuilding what the collapse had threatened to erase. The Worker Rescue Trust became more than a safety net. It transformed into a full-fledged initiative called Dignity First. Under Zuri's leadership, the program provided microloans to small business owners, retraining for factory workers, and scholarships for children whose futures had been jeopardized. For every family that once feared hunger, new hope flickered. One morning, Zuri visited a small workshop on the edge of the city. Inside, women hummed softly as they sewed school uniforms. The manager, a widow named Esther, clasped Zuri's hands with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," Esther whispered. "We thought we were forgotten. But because of you, my children are still in school. Because of you, we still eat." Zuri smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "No, Esther, you saved yourselves. I only reminded the world of your worth." For Zuri, these moments meant more than headlines or boardroom applause. They were the heartbeat of her grandmother's legacy, proof that wealth could be more than power, it could be protection. Yet even as her influence grew, Zuri felt the quiet ache of solitude. She had won a war, but wars leave scars. At night, when the city quieted and her staff departed, she sometimes found herself staring at Cato's letter, tucked away in her drawer. She never answered it. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about letting someone back into your life. It was about freeing yourself from their hold. One evening, Amina joined her on the balcony, where the city lights flickered like scattered stars. "You are restless," Amina observed softly. Zuri sighed. "I have everything now, the company, the trust of the people, even the respect of those who once mocked me. But sometimes I wonder, what about love? Did I bury it with the girl I used to be?" Amina's wise eyes softened. "Love is not buried, child. It is waiting. You needed to find yourself first. Now that you know who you are, love will find you differently. Stronger, cleaner, without chains." Zuri nodded slowly, letting the words settle in her heart. Meanwhile, whispers began spreading in Nairobi's elite circles. A rival tycoon, long overshadowed by the Mwangi name, had begun consolidating influence. While others faltered, he quietly built alliances, promising to restore order in the wake of scandal. Though Zuri did not fear him, she knew power was never idle. For every empire that fell, another hand reached for the crown. But she was no longer naive. She would not be blindsided again. The defining moment came 3 months after Sefu's conviction. Adeyemi Holdings hosted a national summit on corporate ethics, inviting leaders from across Africa. It was more than a conference, it was a statement that a new era had begun. Zuri stood before the packed auditorium, her pendant glinting beneath the lights. Politicians, CEOs, workers, and students filled the hall. The air vibrated with anticipation. "I once endured humiliation at a table where I was told I was nothing," she began. Her voice, calm yet commanding, reached every corner of the room. I was mocked, dismissed, treated as a project rather than a person. But what they didn't know was that silence can be strength. And when the time is right, silence can turn into a voice that breaks empires. She paused, scanning the faces before her. The fall of the Mwangi name was not the fall of a family, it was the fall of arrogance, of disrespect, of greed. Let it be a lesson to all of us: when leaders forget the people they serve, when respect is traded for cruelty, collapse is inevitable. The audience erupted in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, and her words were broadcast live across the continent. That night, as the city buzzed with the echoes of her speech, Zuri returned home to the quiet of her estate. She poured herself a glass of water and stepped into the garden, the moon casting silver over the baobab tree her grandmother once loved. She pressed her pendant and whispered, "I did it, grandmother. I chose dignity, and I will keep choosing it." The wind rustled the leaves as if answering her vow. But the story of Zuri Adeyemi was no fairy tale. She knew there would always be new storms, new rivals, new betrayals, new temptations to compromise. Yet she also knew she was no longer the woman who bent under mockery. She was the woman who rose, who spoke, who led. And somewhere in the city, people whispered her name, not with scorn, but with reverence. A woman who had turned humiliation into honor, betrayal into justice, and silence into a roar that could shake empires. Zuri smiled into the night, her heart both scarred and strong. She was no longer waiting for change. She was the change. This story is more than a tale of betrayal and downfall. It is a reminder for each of us. Zuri's journey shows that dignity cannot be bought and respect cannot be demanded by wealth. True strength lies in knowing your worth, even when others try to belittle you. Love without respect is a prison, but choosing self-worth is freedom. In our own lives, we may face humiliation, betrayal, or people who try to convince us that we are less than we are. But like Zuri, we must remember, silence can protect us, but speaking the truth at the right time can set us free. Never trade your dignity for acceptance, nor your values for temporary gain. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from and what lesson you'll carry into your life. And don't forget to subscribe. Together, we will continue sharing stories that inspire courage, dignity, and hope.